Hello and welcome. My name is Megan Lucky, and this is A Lucky Life. Come along with me as I try and get to know myself better and hopefully help you get to know yourself better too. Hi guys, welcome back. I'm here with ADHD Coach Ron, my friend, and we're going to talk a little bit about ADHD today and just kind of shoot the shit and talk about some things that hopefully are relatable to you guys. I definitely have always struggled with, and this is actually something that I wanted to talk to you about because I saw this on your TikTok and it was so fascinating to me because I never had the H. I always and again, my parents were kind of hush hush about how they talked about my ADD with me or ADHD with me. But you said something that I found really fascinating. Can you explain the difference between ADD and ADHD and if there is one at all? And I know that we're jumping in really fast.
No, this is great. I love this. I didn't even know we were talking about this. So I'm like, I know a lot about this.
Okay, great.
So I too was diagnosed as ADD when I was diagnosed.
Cool.
And so cool. What's interesting is ADD was removed from the DSM in the late 80s.
And what's the DSM for us clueless people?
So the DSM is where you get all of your information regarding mental health disorders.
And
it tells you how to diagnose them and all of that. So right now we're at the DSM-5. And so even when I was diagnosed in, I was 99.
Yeah.
So I was 14, 15.
That's similar, 14, I feel like, to when I was at that age.
Yeah. So even at that time, people still use the term ADD, even though it wasn't in the DSM anymore. Yeah. And the reason it's not.
Wow. It was already not back then. Totally. That's crazy. Okay.
And there wasn't a lot of information out there about ADHD and ADD. Yeah. The distinguishing thing between it obviously is the hyperactivity, right? So when you say oh, I don't have the H, the real term of what ADHD is, it's ADH/D or AD/HD.
Right.
I think it's AD.
I've seen that. Yeah.
Right. So the hyperactivity is a subset of it. So if you say, hey, I have ADHD and I present as inattentive, that would be without the hyperactivity. I present as hyperactive, that would be with, and then also there's combined type. So combined is both of them. You have, and each one has its own distinguishable characteristics between them.
Interesting.
The interesting thing, and a lot of people feel this, is the H is still in someone that's inattentive. It's just internal.
Right. Okay.
It's your brain is always going, you're running on a motor kind of thing.
Yeah. That makes
big
sense.
Overthinking energy.
Oh, then I feel like I should have gotten the H a long time ago. And
but
I guess,
and the presenting,
the
presenting thing is probably a lot have to do with your environment too.
Yeah.
So,
interesting. That makes a lot of sense, actually.
Yeah. And so, an example of if I was, someone says, well, I might have ADHD, but I'm never late, right? I'm always on time. And you're just oh, so you just have no problem showing up on time? They're like, no. I show up on time, but I have a system and I spend hours stressing out about it. And I'm like, oh, so you're stressing yourself out about it.
So there it is.
You have a problem. and so it's there's definitely, I think, a little bit too of a stigma with the ADD, ADHD thing. Similar to you, when I was younger, my parents were told not to tell anyone. Don't tell his teachers, don't tell friends, make sure he knows not to tell people about it, which is so fucked up.
My parents called it focus issues. And so I would be being taken out of class to do the downstairs, I don't even know what that was called. The downstairs place. And my friends would be like, why? And I was like, I have focus issues. And and that's kind of just how I identified. I didn't it wasn't until I got older that it actually made me feel so much better to put a diagnosis on it, because I just could, I was like, what's wrong with me? Why do I, why do I need to do this? But I would see and this is horrible to say, but I would see other types of kids and just put myself in a bucket and be okay, so I'm special, I'm a special. And then I would anyways, I made fun of myself so that I could feel socially accepted. And then it was deeply ingrained in my brain for a long time that like I just wasn't smart and I was less than. So it took a long time and I'm still working on it, but I think that's why this is so important to talk about it.
Totally.
And
when people
sorry. No, you go.
When people talk about labels, right? Like there's definitely certain things within the community that trigger me, so to speak, but it's really like it takes a lot for me not to say stuff sometimes because I'm like, this is just gonna drain my energy, and
sometimes it's not worth it. Sometimes it is.
Labels, for sure. There's definitely times where I'm like, hey, this is misinformation. But like the label conversation and people saying that like we need to not call it a disorder or a disability, and it's like those aren't bad words. They have stigmas in our society, but that's how we get accommodations. That's how we get medication. And if you just can say like disorder itself has nothing bad to it. It's not like a scary word. And so to just be like, hey, I have this disorder in order to function in society. I might need some meds, or like I struggle to produce my own dopamine. So like, store bought's fine. Like things like that.
That's great. And kind of going off that, this is like I'm the most interested in this question because I've been seeing a little bit more about the link between emotional dysregulation and ADHD. And I'm fascinated by that. And I'm wondering if you give your clients tools for the emotional dysregulation aspect of it, or if it's just more like structural, functional, universal tools, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, totally. I've got like a 2-part answer to this.
Okay. Hit me with it.
So one, the tie between emotional regulation and the ability to regulate our emotions and ADHD is like,
it's so strong,
100.
right?
It's basically like almost everything. When especially consider like a lot of our focus problems have to do with interest, right? Like interest pulls our attention and we have almost no control over it.
Yeah.
And interest is an emotion. And so if we can't control the things that we're interested in and we can't control our willpower to like for that, like that's emotional regulation. And that has to do with so much of what we deal with.
Right.
If we feel things 10 times more than other people, we struggle to regulate those things. So it's like when you have and I think it ties to our overthinking, right? So if you are upset about 100%. Something, you're upset about something, typically emotions, like they say, when I heard this, I was like, this is bullshit. But like emotions within 20 minutes go away. Right. And I was like, not my emotions.
Not mine.
and it's because we tend to like tie them to thoughts because we're overthinking, we're trying to problem solve stuff. Yeah. And so the thoughts don't go away. And so they keep like so refreshing our emotions. And so like the hardest, if I was to say like a tool, it's everyone's always looking for a hack or just like, what's the answer, right? And
there's no,
it's more complicated than that. Like at least we can figure out why it's happening and what we want to happen, like how we want it to deal with it. So it's like when you're overthinking and you're dealing with these emotions, you want to be able in that moment to figure out how to become present. So how do I become aware in that moment?
And I even feel like that's something I talk about. Like it's different for everyone, you know, everyone has their toolbox of things that help them regulate their emotions. And I also think it's different for every emotion and environment, you know, like there are different things that calm you and bring you back to the present moment, like you said.
Yeah. And so you've got present moment, and then a lot of it's experimenting, right? You're like, hey, what's going to help me remember this? And then being okay with like meeting yourself where you are. So if you're like, wow, my emotions hit a 10, it takes 3 days for me to get over something. If that's where you are right now, like what's the next step? And it's like, well, maybe when my emotions are a 10, I can figure out by the next day how to calm my emotions down. Yeah. And so we start working slowly back to it. Yeah. And it really does have to do with yourself, right? Like for me, I'll give people like, I'll say, do you want to know what I do? I don't know if it's going to help you, but like I can tell you, and then we could kind of maybe brainstorm something. Right. But when I'm ever in, and this happened to me a couple of years ago where I was in like a really bad rumination RSD spiral where I just was thinking everyone hated me. And it like, I'm sure we've all been there where we're like, oh, my friends hate me because of the look they gave me or something they said. But it kept going and it got worse. And it just turned to this thing where it was like, it's the whole world's out to get me. And I ended up putting elastic bands on my wrist to just in the
like,
moment, if I saw them, it was like I connected like that reminder, like,
wow,
hey, you
that's so
promised
smart.
to yourself that you were gonna like take a second.
Yeah.
And it like connected me to back when I decide, like, so in the morning I'm like, all right, I'm gonna put these elastic
Um,
bands on and know that when I see this, I'm going to remind myself to take a second and that everything's okay and that you don't have to solve it right now. And so when I saw it, it was like that reminder,
right.
and it
It's
was
like an
able to like snap
anchor.
me into it. Yeah,
That's
exactly. It's like
I,
Inception, right? With his
yeah,
top thing. Yeah, same
yeah,
thing.
exactly. Someone in the plane in front of me was watching that yesterday, and I was like, I gotta watch that again. um, but yeah, like I got certified as a life coach this summer because
Oh,
I've
nice.
always been, and I still like, as we were talking about earlier off camera or off recording, us ADHDers love to start new projects and we get excited about them. And that's definitely something I do. And I get like, I finished it and I was so proud of myself for actually finishing it, because a lot of the times I also lose my tangents, but I have kind of felt like got a little bit of imposter syndrome with, okay, I feel like I don't have my life in order and I need to figure that out before I take on new clients. And so I'm working on that before I, before I really get into it. But anyways, back to the comparison I was about to make. Um, there's there's something called an anchor that is kind of like it grounds you and it brings you back to that, like whatever you're trying to rewire your brain to a new neural pathway, to bring yourself usually to a calm and choose a different response to whatever you had chosen before.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I feel like that's a really good example of an anchor and something that is grounding you when you kind of like, if you just see it. I feel like my tattoos are a little bit like that. Like I feel like whenever I see one of my tattoos, they all have a different meaning, but
Mm-hmm.
like they kind of remind me, like this one is, it's tiny, it's a little like artsy zero. That I do tarot cards and I love the fool. That's the first one. It's the zero. And it basically means you're young, you're naive, you're on your journey, you're going to fall, but you're going to get back up. And that's exactly where you're supposed to be. And I love that because I feel like throughout my entire life, like a lot of the times I'm like, I'm not where I should be. And I need to be here and I need to be doing this. And I don't feel good enough. That's my big trauma. That's my big trigger. So I feel like whenever I see it, like it brings, and it's hidden a little. So it's not always. And I feel like the rubber bands are an even better example, but so
It's
find an
similar for me,
anchor.
right?
Yeah.
But
That's
it's
great.
it's like it's being able to realize that like we also really struggle to go back and forth between our emotional and our logical brain. So when our
Yes.
emotions are high,
Mm-hmm.
it's we don't have as much control. And that's where like a lot of our impulses come from. So our
I know.
impulsivity and our inability to, regulate, it's all from that. And
Yeah. Wow.
it's hard to have emotions that high and think straight, so to speak,
Yeah.
right? So if and that's good and bad, right? When you're like fully
Yes.
excited and you're just
That's
like,
true. I didn't think
whatever,
about
I'm
it like
going,
that.
like I'm gonna make like this impulsive decision because I'm having a good time, like
Right.
also same thing.
My head immediately goes to the negative, and I'm reading a
Right.
book called The Negativity Bias. That's not what it's called. It's called The Power of Bad, but it's about the
But we do have a
negativity bias.
negativity bias for sure.
Yes. Oops.
Yeah.
We do have a negativity bias. And it's like, when there was, I just read a line that said something about how if you were to think of a list of 20 words that have to do with emotions, most of the list would be negative, because like when we think of emotions, like as soon as you said like, oh, we're mostly like, it's hard for us to jump out of emotional and logical, I'm like thinking about the negative times only, like, and the times that I'm like high on like an anger or like a frustration or a sadness, and that takes over, and I
Mhm.
need to like be better sometimes then at accessing that like logical side, and I struggle with that for sure. And again, like I guess it's just kind of knowing yourself and like bringing yourself back down to earth, or do you have any?
Yeah, well, so like, okay, so you notice it, right? You're
Yeah.
able to like anchor, ground yourself, be present for a moment. Something that I used to tell people, and this is what I did was in that when I was in that situation, is I did something that a lot of times they teach you in couples counseling, which
Oh,
is like
interesting.
to fight fair. And
that's kind of what I'm like, what my mind was going to. So.
yeah, right. And so like fighting fair with, a partner is basically like when emotions are high, you're just going to hurt the other person.
Yeah.
And so they recommend to agreeing to each other that you're allowed to take a break. You don't have to like fight right then and there. You can, and you can just be like, I need 5 minutes and we will come back to this. And it's this agreement you do outside. So it always has to be done before, like when it's not happening, right? You have to be like, hey, this is what
If we
happens
do
when
this. Yeah.
when we fight. I'm super emotional. I say things I don't mean. I'm angry. I can't think straight. And it becomes this attack where I have to win. I have to like beat you. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't want to do that because then later on it's
I'll
like
regret
we've
it. You can't
ruptured
take
our
those things
relationship.
back. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And so you're like, okay. So in that moment, when I notice, when I'm able to ground and be present, that this is just going to go bad, one of us needs to be like, hey, we need to stop for a second. And to be honest, at first, it's not great. At first, the other person's like, no, fuck that.
Yeah, and a
like,
lot of ADHD, like, I don't know if this
Yeah.
is the same, but like anxious attachment style, where it's like, no, I
Totally.
have to figure it out right now, because then it's like my brain is gonna go like, oh, we're horrible.
Well, your
like,
friend's in fight or flight, so it's like in
yes,
survival mode, and it's going like, I have to solve this right now, or I'm gonna die. Right.
yeah,
And so
exactly.
you have to come to this agreement outside of it, and it takes practice, right?
Yeah.
But a few times in, you start to go fine, and then you like, I'm gonna go take the dog for a walk, or I'm gonna go lay down, or I'm gonna go
and
sit on
start
my
to
phone
get
for 10
your
minutes.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna wait for this like anger that's at a 9 or a 10 to come down to like a 5, where it's manageable. Like I'm still mad, but like I can now have a
take a
logical
breath.
conversation.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
we can
That's
work
so
together.
important.
Because if you're in a relationship, the idea is same team. Like we're on the same team trying to win a game, not like we're on opposite sides, right?
Yeah.
The same goes with your brain. So think of your brain as your partner, where your brain is just like fully emotional and just angry,
that's
or
genius.
embarrassed or scared or whatever.
Yeah.
Right? A lot of times
treat it like your partner, because sometimes you can't, you aren't in control of it, even though like most of the time, honestly. Well,
you're not your brain.
You are
that's for another,
though.
Sometimes, yes. But like I like to look at a brain as someone that doesn't speak English, and so I have to like convince it to like do things instead of just telling it. Right. But anyway, going back to this.
Yeah.
If you're fighting with your brain, you have to make that deal outside of the argument that, hey, when we're fighting and we're emotional, we need to take 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And again, doesn't happen the first time. In fact, the first time you're like, holy shit, this feels scary. I feel unsafe. I
definitely feel like
happen.
It's been like, it took at least a year for me to be able to like fully see that and like be able to be okay taking some time. And I still don't always do it.
No,
but
totally.
It's definitely,
I still don't.
Yeah, it definitely happens.
I mean, you were kind of saying how you have imposter syndrome around life coaching. Yeah. And so often as an ADHD coach, it's like, I haven't cured my ADHD.
Yeah.
It's like, I still deal with a lot.
Can we talk about that? Like, because I feel like that's super relatable to me. Like, how did you get started? Well, because I know like that was such an awesome big deal for you, like finding this career. And like, I feel like also what I talk a lot about on this podcast is like following your intuition and like your calling, and not going just on the treadmill of, society, what they want you to do and what you think you should be doing, but actually doing what you feel called to. So how did you come into it, and what has the process been like, and how is the imposter syndrome, if you still have any of that?
Yeah.
Sorry, there was a lot. So
no, it's good. I mean, it's buckle up, guys.
ADHD.
It was hard, right?
Yeah.
I was the very beginning of the pandemic. I was a realtor in early 2020, and I was doing amazing. For the first time, something that I was doing was working, right? Instead of me just like getting a job, doing well for a little while, and then either quitting or being threatened like that I'm not doing well enough, or I'm not, whatever, right? So that felt great, but I was still like sad. And I didn't know why. It was this thing I felt like I had to prove that I was good enough. very
Mm.
like similar to what you're
Mhm.
saying before, I really
Mhm.
relate to.
Yes.
Which is a very typical ADHD thing because
Really.
we tend to be behind our peers in like the way that our brain develops by like 30%.
Wow.
So people
That's a
say
lot.
we're immature or we're irresponsible. And those things
Crazy.
are,
Like,
yeah. And all of those things are just where it's harder for us. So if we're not as good as everyone else, people look at us and they're like, well, why aren't you?
yeah.
Instead of, why aren't you? And like actually
Yeah.
being
No, with a
curious about it.
curious lens.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But so anyway, it was really difficult for me. I started having panic attacks,
Yeah.
which up until that point in my life, like anxiety was a foreign concept to me. I kind of
Yeah.
just was someone that loved to wing it, thought I was great at winging it, but I was hitting this point now. I was in my mid 30s and felt like I was behind. And um yeah, started feeling the pressure of responsibility of being an adult and just thinking that I couldn't cut it. And so I started going to therapy.
Yeah.
Like I'd said before, I was going through these rumination spirals, and RSD was like a really big issue for me at the time.
Right.
And for anybody that doesn't know what that is, it's rejection
Me.
sensitive dysphoria. Great. It
Lisa.
is
Oh,
something that
I have that for sure.
it's
Whatever.
not a clinical thing, so it's
Right.
not like in the DSM. And it's,
Hmm.
I say controversial because there's people that just say like, well, it's not like a real thing, but
Right.
99% of ADHDers relate to it.
Wow.
Just to
Yeah.
be like,
I
yeah, no, I
mean,
know what
in
that
as
is.
soon as you said, I was like,
Rejection
yeah,
sensitive, yeah.
yep.
And it's like it's a lot of the reason we're people pleasers. We tend
Mm.
to,
Mm.
be afraid to make decisions that might upset people, any of that.
It's
And
crazy just how many ties there are that like
oh yeah.
I had no idea like
Well,
this was all linked back.
think about this too, and we'll get back to my story in a
Yeah.
second.
Yeah.
But I find
Sorry.
this so
Sorry.
interesting. No, this is what ADHD is, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, we always say we have ADHD, which we
Hmm.
do, but
Oh,
I
yes.
like
I
to
saw
think
a
of
video you
like
posted
this
on this.
is a classification of our brain.
Yeah.
Like our brain is just it. We do this. We're still human. We have this similar thing. So someone without ADHD is still going to struggle with a lot of what we do. It's just this. All of the things are more intense. It's like turned up to an 11.
Yeah.
And so of course it's going to affect every area of our life. It's
Yeah.
literally how we interact with the world. So to me, I just think of it as I'm an ADHDer. Like instead of I have ADHD, I'll still say it,
Yeah.
but like I try to say ADHDers, that label to me is not a bad thing. It's just, oh, this is how I interact with the world. And knowing that has done nothing but improve my life because it's like having
Wow.
this awareness of yourself. Like
Right.
that's the only way you can grow if you know where to start. So it's
Right.
like, oh, I know I really suck at transitions. So if like I'm working on something, I can't just be given something else. I need a buffer in between. If I'm taking a break, I have to like ramp myself up to get back to work.
Right. It's
Or I
not
have
like a
to like
label or an identity. It's just like owning and like
knowledge.
having, yeah, exactly. It's knowledge. It's knowledge.
Right? The more you know yourself, the better off you're going to be.
Yeah.
And
That's facts. Facts.
when we're judgmental of ourselves, we're going to avoid getting to know ourselves because we feel shit about it. So it's like if I'm
I wish,
ashamed of myself, I'm not going to
yeah.
think about that.
Yeah.
I'm not going to look back in the mirror at myself because I don't like myself.
And then you're never going to grow and you're never going to improve.
Yeah,
And that's,
exactly.
I talk about that a lot. Like
Yeah.
being okay with not being good at something or being okay with like not knowing something
Mm-hmm.
is, it makes so much, it's so much of a difference to like
Totally.
accept that. And it also makes you smarter. Like you're not going to try and be someone that you're not, and
Yeah.
you're going to not reinforce, oh, hold on. You're not reinforcing like those negative like feelings within yourself of ashamed, being ashamed of who you are. Like,
I relate a lot of stuff to sports. And so I
yeah,
think of if you were the coach of a team and you had a player, like let's just use baseball, for example, and you had a
right.
player that was just a home run hitter and he was really slow,
Yeah,
you wouldn't be spending all practice like teaching him how to steal a base.
right. Right.
Or like it might be a good idea to learn how to
A
like take a
little. Yeah.
secondary lead or like learn how to bunt, but it's like you're not
Right.
bunting, bud.
Right.
Like you
Right.
just
Right.
what like so it's good to know what you're good at so you can focus on
capitalize on it.
Yeah,
exactly.
for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
But anyway, back to what I was saying.
Please.
So yeah, I was in real estate. I was doing really well.
Right.
Not happy. Beginning of the pandemic happened. All of us were bored. So we started making videos. My wife is an actor, obviously, as you know. But she's a dancer, actor, all around hilarious person. And so she started making videos. And I started making videos, and I would go on TikTok and see a lot of these ADHD advocates and some coaches that were blowing my mind just with like things that I was always ashamed to say. And I felt comfortable. One thing that I think I'm usually comfortable with is being honest and vulnerable with things that I struggle with. I like have no problem with that usually.
Yeah, me too. Usually there are exceptions.
I'm just like, guess what? I suck at brushing my teeth yesterday. And and so when I started,
that's a gift,
right? It is. And so I started posting videos about I forget what the first couple ones were, but and I started to get all these messages from people that said just like, oh my gosh, I find this so relatable. Thank you for making me feel seen. And like,
I got the chills.
And I was crying like daily by this stuff. And I just became hyper focused, right? Like really obsessed with like, all right, I'm gonna make more content, all this stuff. The problem is that people were coming to me for advice, and I did not feel like I could do it. Right. And so
imposter syndrome
totally and so I decided I wanted to do something for the community, and I didn't know what. And ADHD Coach felt like the thing to do.
And how did you did you have an ADHD coach? Like, how did you find out? Was it content you were seeing that was like, oh, this is a thing? I had no idea. Like, how did you discover it?
So I mean, I was I'm a psychology major, but I didn't like go beyond to become
I didn't know that
more.
Right.
And it was really to get a degree, and I loved psychology, but at the time it was like I switched from like accounting to business.
Probably looking back, I wish that I had done something more in that family, but I went sports and entertainment management, so
which is awesome. That's something I always wanted. But
it was fun.
The thing is I again imposter syndrome like crazy. I was just like, who the hell am I? Why
should I?
And really, it really came down to I was like, people are just listening to me because I'm an outgoing white dude. And I want to be more than that.
Right. So, and you are.
Like, thanks. But like at the time I was just like, cool, like who the hell am I? And I have the experience of someone that had ADHD for 35 years, but who am I to tell people? So I saw some coaches posting TikToks online. And I started following different people. I started getting involved in the community, meeting other people, which again, if you're anybody out there that is involved with social media, like my advice to you is to find other creators and people within your community to network with, because that is what keeps you going when you have this like advice. Friendship, right? Because they share your stuff, you share their stuff, like you can pump them up, they pump you up. Like otherwise it's super lonely. We're just sitting in front of our phones or our computers by ourselves. We don't have like an office of like coworkers. But anyway, so I started to become friends with some people. And again, during the pandemic, it was a lot easier. There was nothing to do. So we were like, we started a Discord server. I started playing D&D for the first time with a bunch of ADHD creaters, and we called it ADHD.
That's so awesome. That's
and
great.
And they were Twitch streaming. And so just having a lot of fun with people, learning a lot, getting to know a lot of different corners of our community that are super underrepresented. And, just even culturally, ADHD is so different across the board. And it really does focus, especially in the DSM, it's focused towards white people. It is. And mostly men too, right? It's like this was a disorder of little boys, like 90%. That couldn't sit still. That's how you got diagnosed. But anyway, I saw some coaches. I was really interested in it, and it felt like the path to getting more involved. I wasn't even sure I was going to be a coach. I was just like, this feels right. I want some kind of credibility and validity, and I want to learn more, and I want to be able to help. And through that, I found even more of a cohort and found a ton of different coaches that are like some of my best friends now.
Wow.
And I really just became obsessed with helping the community any way I could. I still, even to this day, like to say I'm an advocate before coach. I enjoy coaching, but I always have, again, as an ADHDer, tons of ambition towards other things, right? So like I coach
me too,
because like if I'm going to be able to do this and give to the community full time, I need to make money. So like
yes.
Right. But besides that,
but doing like, something that you love to make money
totally.
is like the best
and
situation.
So kind of like we were saying before, we love novelty. So things that are new, like, are interesting to us. It's what activates our brains. That's why after a while at a job, we're like, fuck this. I want out. Like, I don't care anymore. And it's a lot easier for if you're an entrepreneur and you're able to do this, like, find different ways to change what your job is. So it's like, sure, I still coach, but I'm a speaker. I'm running a cruise for ADHD professionals. I do I run a community. We do body doubling services. I am constantly looking for the next thing that I'm going to do, whether it's, I make content, or I make, visual content, or I want to start making a blog, or I want to do a podcast. Like, all of these things keep me activated, and it keeps me involved, and under like the umbrella of ADHD.
Right. I like that.
Yeah. And it's, when I'm working on something, sure, I might be giving more time to the new thing, but when I'm activated, I can still do the things I'm supposed to do. If I'm just stuck in a rut with something, I'm not going to want to do anything. And then I just sit there and don't care. So I try to embrace that part of me. It goes back to the whole, like, work with your ADHD, not against it. So it's like, if my brain really wants to like do new things, as long as I'm on top, like, aware of it, and every once in a while I'm checking in and being like, okay, am I still good? Like, am I still working on the stuff I need to, and I'm not being like too impulsive? Then awesome. Then I'm doing what I'm supposed to.
That's amazing. Well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but there's only 2 minutes left. Otherwise, I would have to upgrade my Zoom. So I like, if unless there's something that you want to add to that, my last question or statement, I guess, is, what do you think is the biggest misconception about ADHD that you want to clear up? There's a lot, I'm sure.
Man, the biggest misconception about ADHD, I mean, just from a generic standpoint, like, it is not a lack of effort or a lack of want or
that's
a lack
such
of
a good
care.
one. Yep.
It's, if anything, every ADHD I've ever met cares so much. We care about everything, right? And understand that behaviors, especially for children, are communication. And it's a way to tell you that they're having a hard time. And just going back to like Ted Lasso quote, right? Curiosity over judgment. Like, it really is the best way to figure out how to move forward.
Well, thank you so much, Coach ADHD Ron, everybody. He's amazing. And I so appreciate you coming on here and talking about this. So let's catch up soon, and I'll be in touch.
Word. Later.
Thanks, Ron. Hello and welcome. My name is Megan Lucky, and this is A Lucky Life. Come along with me as I try and get to know myself better, and hopefully help you get to know yourself better too.